the legislature spent 3 or 4 days making sure that noodling was safe for you and your families to do. Something to do on the Labor Day holiday, I guess, right? Right. We had also 6 emergency issues. The governor can come in. The Constitution says during the first 60 days of a session, you can't do anything except hear bills. Now, this dates to the years when they didn't have, copy machines and printing and all of this stuff, so they actually read all of the legislation. When you sat in the House or the Senate for the first 60 days, they would sit up there and a reading clerk would read all of this legislation. It sounds fascinating, but they didn't have television in those days. So anyway, they have this vestige of this where the first 60 days you can't consider everything unless the governor declares it an emergency. And all an emergency means is that he says so. So it doesn't have to actually be an emergency. It's just items that he designates. We started with 6 of those: sanctuary cities, voter ID, state call for a federal balanced budget, a piece of eminent domain legislation, sonograms. This was the bill that would require sonograms before an abortion was performed, and loser pays, which was a tort reform thing, basically, where if you file a certain kind of lawsuit under certain circumstances, you have to pay the winner. And Perry went 5 for 6 on those things. And if you listen to that list, that's a pretty good list if you were running for president of the United States. I don't think that they were thinking about it. In fact, I'm one of the people that believed Perry during the entire spring when we were asking him, your name keeps coming up in this presidential thing, are you interested? And he kept saying, no. And you'll see videotapes, if you haven't already, of, I know a couple of TV stations have put together videotapes of 5 or 6 versions of Perry saying no. And I think he was serious, and I believed him at the time, and I think, he was probably telling the truth at the time. Politicians are, like the rest of us, it's an entrepreneurial business, and they're opportunistic, and the door opened and he walked through it. So, I don't really fault him for jumping on that. But you couldn't have put together a better list of emergency issues if you knew you were running for president than they ended up putting up. So the so what on this is, as you go forward into a political year, you look at a legislative session 2, or the legislative result 2 ways. Say, okay, did they do the things that they promised that they would do when they went up there? Did they not do the things they promised they wouldn't do when they went up there? And what did they screw up? And what do they get blamed for? You can get blamed, and you can find historical examples of people getting voted out of office because there was a really, really big drought. And the grass all turned brown, and then it turned gray. And, clearly we have to blame somebody, so they vote everybody out of office. It's not necessarily what someone does, but it's what attaches to. So one of the things that we're going to see over the next 3 or 4 or 5 months is what, if anything, from the legislative session actually attaches to people in a way that influences the outcome of elections. I had a couple of conversations during the session with lawmakers who were concerned, not scared or paranoid necessarily, but concerned because you sort of figuratively look out this window, and there was a group out here with signs protesting taxes, big government. That's the Tea Party, and they were, particularly Republicans because it's part of their party. They were looking out that window, and that's an interesting crowd. I'm going to pay attention to that. And then you figuratively look out this window over here, and there was a crowd of people with signs and banners saying, "Don't cut public schools. Don't cut public education." And they're mindful of that crowd too. So you come out of a legislative session, if you're a legislator, you kind of look at this and say, well, did I make them both mad? Did I satisfy them both, at least where they're not going to come up and kill me? Or did I make one or the other mad? And that's one of the things that we're going to find out here. I think we're going to find out in the presidential election and in the state elections whether the Tea Party phenomena in Texas and in the United States is a group of people who are big or just loud. Now, in our polling, we have this question that's a generic question where we say if you could vote for a Republican or a Democrat or an independent for office, you name whatever office, U.S. Senate or whatever, and you kind of get how they identify themselves to a Republican state. So there's Republicans, and about 8 or 9 points behind them is Democrats, and then about tied with the Democrats are the independents. The second question, pardon me, Austin allergies. The second question is, if the Tea Party were an actual party, how would you vote? And about 2/3 of the Republican votes come out and become Tea Party votes, at least when you're polling. So the question is, if you put a Rick Perry up against a Mitt Romney, for example, you have sort of a traditional establishment Republican here, you have someone who's more in the Tea Party vein here, how does that split? How does that split in Texas politics? And I think that's one of the things we're going to be watching here, certainly through March, through the primaries. The next question that these elections are going to answer, at least on a state level, are what is it that we want the state government to do that they haven't done or that they haven't been able to do. So if you send somebody to Austin and you say, we want this and this and this and this, and they come back, excuse me, they come back, with some of that, but they say we couldn't do all of it because the budget was bad. You come up with questions like, what are you going to do to solve the budget problems? Is there a new tax fix that you have to do? If you're going to come in $10 billion behind every time, you either need to cut the list of things that you've promised to do, which is difficult to do because every promise has a constituency, or you're going to come up with $10 billion new dollars to fill that hole, which is difficult to do because you promised not to raise taxes. So those are the problems that they're confronting, and those are the things that they're going to, as they go through this election cycle, answer. We're going to start the next legislative session in 2013 with our structural deficit of about $10 billion. That's a number that the controller uses. They say, if you just keep doing this and you keep doing that, you're going to start about $10 billion behind. And the legislature did something this session that was, thank you very much. Legislature did something this session that was, let's just say, a little dubious. They took, when they estimate how much they're going to spend on Medicaid, they say we have this many people who qualify, they're going to use this many services, and those services cost this much. Caseload, utilization rate, and cost. And they get an estimate, and they get a hard number, and they say, okay, plug that into the budget, because we have to deliver that, we have these programs, you got to do that. What they did this time was they looked at the budget and they said, we can't afford to do all of that, and we're going to have to cut another $5 billion. But we can't cut it there because it's a required program, and if we cut $5 billion, we'll have to cut it elsewhere. Public education, higher education, something like that. So they took $4.8 billion out of the estimate. Just said, lower the estimate. Change the caseload, change the utilization rate, change the cost, whatever it is you're going to do. Take 4.8 out. And the budget now balances without 4.8 billion. It's about 5 months worth of Medicaid. And so they'll come in 2013 in January for their session that starts then. And the first thing they'll have to do is say, either we lucked out and utilization rates went down, or costs went down, or the federal government miraculously changed the law, or the economy rebounded to the tune of $4.8 billion, or they have to come up with $4.8 billion really quickly. You remember the fight about the rainy day fund? We had $9 billion. We start the session with $9 billion in our savings account. We don't have to raise taxes, but luckily, like good chipmunks, we've saved all of this. Good chipmunks sitting on big oil reserves. We've saved all of this money. We've got $9 billion back here. They used about $3 billion for a current budget deficit. So they had about $6 billion left. And then they said, we can't spend that, we're not going to spend that. One of the reasons that they didn't spend that is because that's the reserve against the $4.8 billion in Medicaid spending that they kind of put off until next time. So when they walk in next time, a lot of the problems that they had this time are still going to be there. And a lot of, just like a lot of things, a lot of the decisions they make are sort of forced on them by the resources that they have and by the resources that they don't have. So that's kind of a quick layout. I think when we get out of this session, we came into this year. Doesn't seem like it was just 8 months ago, but if you remember 8 months ago, we had 76 Republicans and 74 Democrats in the Texas House. Then we had a November election in 2010, and all of a sudden we had 101 Republicans and 49 Democrats in the Texas House. We had another statewide sweep, so the Republicans still have all of those offices. We had sweeps that went all the way down to some of those East and West Texas counties that still had yellow dogs and still had county commissioners who'd been there for 30 years. Well, so-and-so's a Democrat, but he votes just like the rest of us. Those guys got beat. That was how big a year that was. So one of the questions that we're going to have here going into this legislative election is how many of those 101 Republicans come back. I don't think it'll be 101. I think it'll be, this is something reporters talk about over whiskey, but I think it'll be probably 90 to 93 Republicans. It'll still be an overwhelmingly Republican majority. I think you'll still get a majority of Republicans in the Texas Senate. The congressional seats, if they hold up in court in the redistricting maps, we get 4 new seats. You know, we should have an overwhelmingly Republican congressional delegation going forward. So, you know, the names will change in some places, the faces will change in some places. I think, you know, we continue to be a red state. Those will continue to be red legislative bodies, and they'll be confronting those same problems to a large extent that they've confronted up to now. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions y'all have about politics or the state government or whatever. Austin allergies. An expert. Yes, sir.
Are they discussing what to do with the entitlements? Because if you project them out, they're going to eat up the whole budget.
The question was, are they talking about the entitlements? They're always talking about the entitlements. And, you know, this is a problem. Talmadge Hampton was a Republican appropriations chairman from Houston. He's now at the Texas Public Policy Foundation, which is a conservative think tank here in Austin. But when he was appropriations chair, he will tell you, he's told me that he quickly realized that every line in the budget has a constituency. And, you know, if nothing else, politicians are responsible. And if you go to them, if you know, everybody sends their people to Austin, and some of us go down there and talk to the people that are in Austin, you know, as this goes on, and they're responsive to them. And entitlements are, to some extent, protected by the people who get entitlements, who also vote. They're, you know, I mean, it's a problem. You have this recurring problem in state government to a lesser extent, actually, and in the federal government to a greater extent, of a government that has basically promised more than it can afford to deliver. So the question becomes, you know, it's complex, but the question at the top level is really simple. Do you want to cut your promises, or do you want to raise your money? And that's kind of, you know, if you watch cable television, that's kind of what the fight is. At the state level, increasingly, healthcare controls the budget. Healthcare costs control the budget. Fastest rising component of prison spending is healthcare. Fastest rising component of employee costs, you know, state government, universities, school systems, all of that is healthcare, healthcare insurance, all of those kinds of things. So, you know, clearly you have to get some kind of control on it. And at that point in the simple question, it becomes a complex question of who gets cut, and that's, you know, kind of where the fight is. Did that answer your question, sort of?
Well, sort of, because I mean, if you extend it out, it's going to turn into a Greece and Italy and Spain kind of situation.
You know, it is a little bit like dieting. You know, you got to stop eating at some point, or you have to start running at some point, or you have to look up in 18 months and say, you know, you're just, you know, too large. You know, my shirt collar's too tight. That's why I like that picture. Somebody else?